Hello, I'm Clare. I'm a journalist and broadcaster with a special interest in environmental journalism and the safety of journalists. One of my projects was to write a journalism safety curriculum for UNESCO and the International Federation of Journalists, and I'm currently researching media safety at Melbourne's Swinburne University of Technology. It's a pleasure to be supporting you and the AIBD at this Earth Day 2019 on the theme of protecting species. Some of us have met before. In 2010, I spoke to the AIBD conference in Macau about the safety of journalists. Since then, there's been a lot of attention and action globally to address the growing problem of journalists being killed, imprisoned and harassed. And here are some of the steps that have been taken. Today I'll talk about environmental journalism and the safety of journalists as a way for us to consider how Earth Day might galvanise us to take action to make journalism safer for the brave and committed people who tell environmental stories. Earth Day reminds us that the world is in an environmental crisis. Animal species and population are in decline. There's damage to coral reefs, which is becoming irreversible. Humans are exploiting Earth's resources, including fossil fuels, in a way which is affecting the way we live and die on the planet. In particular, climate change means we're seeing more extreme weather events and changes that impact on our daily lives. Habitat destruction, overfishing and pollution, and they're damaging our environment and reducing our quality of life. Just a few recent stories in our region range from an unexpected deadly storm in Nepal, electricity blackouts in Australia, and a fungus spread by the illegal pet trade which is wiping out frogs. Climate change is an Earth crisis which is demanding urgent action. The Earth Day Network is asking for action. As journalists, we can examine and storify their agenda. It is to educate and raise awareness, to achieve major policy victories, to build and activate a global movement, and to encourage individual action. The role of journalists and the media in environmental journalism is the same as in the general field: to be eyewitnesses, to find the truth, to question those who hold power, and seek understanding. We are storytellers with an important job to hold a mirror to our societies. But there are some particular challenges and risks to environmental journalism, and I'd like to go through these. Looking at some principles for environmental journalism, story topics, approaches, and some of the risks to the journalists themselves. But first, some principles for environmental journalism. Understand the science, but avoid the jargon that your audience won't understand. There's a lot to learn about science, environmental threats, solutions, laws, and treaties. Be careful not to convey information which is out of context, misleads, or implies blame. Appreciate there are often several sides to the story. A story about an elephant trampling crops may be a story about farming, or it could be about loss of habitat. The ethics of journalism apply here too. I'll come to this shortly. Let's go back to the story of the elephant trampling the crops. It could be a story about farming, or loss of habitat, or land use, or even corruption. There are human stories too about development, poverty reduction, culture, attitudes to welfare, and so on. Some approaches to environmental journalism. Be aware there are many voices in environmental stories, those of residents, business, developers, scientists, environmental campaigners, charities, legal and police agencies, Indigenous people and academics, and also offenders and perpetrators. They have different views and concerns. Stories can be news or features. They can include human stories, animal stories, development, protection, prosecution. Putting a human face on a story helps your audience relate to the issues. There's a long list. Environmental journalism is a rich source of story ideas. They can be local, regional, international, from local water quality to competition for fish stocks to international wildlife trafficking. Use images, sounds, and case studies to bring the stories to life. And use social media to engage with your audiences and get their stories and their views. Negative stories about the environment turn audiences off. Nobody wants to hear about crisis and despair in the environment all the time. Stories can be framed to show catalysts for change, signs of hope, or solutions. Think about ideas from peace journalism or solutions journalism. Celebrate the positive stories, such as the birth of an endangered animal, scientific progress, or rehabilitation of a wildlife habitat after mining, logging, or a natural disaster. Show success when a poacher is prosecuted or a guilty person is jailed or a development which would harm animal habitats is renegotiated. Now, a word about ethics, because as well as the usual ethics around balance and objectivity, environmental reporting often involves some other responsibilities, particularly where there are victims. After natural disasters, many people are injured or traumatised. Taking pictures and interviewing people who are still suffering can create further harm. Be aware of whether you're being a reporter or have slipped into becoming an advocate, either for the environment or for some other interest. Environmental stories often involve large developments and large industries like mining, energy and forestry. There's a lot of money and power to be lost and won. This makes environmental journalism one of the more dangerous activities for reporters, so there are some essential safety tips. Around the world, more journalists are being killed and harassed than ever before. Environmental journalists are high up on that list. The Committee to Protect Journalists says at least 53 journalists were killed in 2018, an increase on previous years. So to some specific tips. Consider giving your reporters safety training. These days, it's not only war correspondents who need training, equipment and insurance. Do a risk assessment before going to the field. Look at what hazards there are and what the consequences would be if things went wrong. Plan to reduce the risk. Traffic accidents are one of the most common risks, so ensure vehicles are in good condition. Have a communication plan. Call into the editor regularly and have a backup plan if that call doesn't come. Particularly if you're going to a remote area or the scene of a disaster, take some food and water, medicine if you need it. Learn some first aid and carry a first aid kit for you and your team. Wear the right clothes for the job, shoes that protect your feet, a hat, sun protection or something warm. Think about how to protect your data, your recording equipment or notebook, computer or phone, from the elements and from the authorities. Carry a grab bag, something that keeps your essential equipment such as documents, snacks and emergency numbers together and you can use if you're arrested or have some other problem. Freelancers need to be paid properly so they can buy protective equipment and reduce the need to take unnecessary risks. Women face additional risks of assault and harassment, so think about how to mitigate those risks, such as by always having an exit strategy. Environmental protests and demonstrations can turn violent, so again, have an exit strategy and wear shoes you can run in. Look after yourself physically and mentally. Covering traumatic events can have an effect on our mental health. Journalists are very resilient, but they often don't acknowledge the impact that covering traumatic stories can have. Counselling, peer support, and self-care like eating and sleeping well can help. Finally, here are some resources on environmental journalism and trauma. There are many more online. Your organisation could consider joining the International News Safety Institute and look at the UN Plan on Journalist Safety. The Earth Day Network is advocating for environmentalism and action to conserve species. They remind us that we can all play a part in protecting our beautiful world. On a positive note, they reassure us that we can act to slow the rate of extinction and perhaps help some species to recover. Thank you for inviting me to share Earth Day 2019 with you.